So they're trying to say, okay, well, did I do this or did I miss something? Well, have they been this way the whole time? And the trust is completely gone. The marriage starts to disintegrate. Forgiveness comes right away because they love each other. I forgive you, yes, but it's going to take a long time to build the trust. And if a couple can successfully, maneuver through that, then they'll be even stronger. But sometimes it's too much damage. And depending on what the partner who does not have the addiction, depending on what the trauma in their life is, they may or may not be able to come back from that. And so divorce is a healthy thing.
I've seen a lot where I'm like, you two are much better off without each other. Like, I know today's a bad day, but tomorrow we'll start looking up a little bit. And you talked about these patterns. Forgiveness is instantaneous, but then questioning on the back end. What other patterns do you see in couples where addiction is present?
Where one partner monitors the other partner, and they're looking for reasons to say, "Are you using? Or did you drink again? Did I smell that? Where have you been?" So that's overwhelming, and it will cause an addict to stay in active addiction. Um, Codependency, where one person thinks that they need to make sure the other person is okay, but unless they're doing that, they don't feel okay. So it's a vicious cycle. Vicious cycle. So it's chronic mistrust. It's even the partner who is not the addict will enable the other addict because they think that's loving him. It's like, well, if I could just keep his addiction contained or her addiction contained to our house, let me just make sure they can do it here. You know, but really, that's literally loving someone to death. Um, you start to have arguments that are not productive. So instead of debating a topic, you just argue and each person just wants to be right and they just wants to throw darts and hit low and win the argument, because they're so hurt. There's so much shame and guilt from the addict, and there's so much anger and just confusion from the partner who does not have an addiction. Parent and child roles reverse. Even in single parent homes, the child becomes the parent and the child becomes the babysitter. When a parent is just inebriated or they're just too drunk to function or they're too high to think, the child takes over, which is traumatic for the child. Now the child is much more susceptible to becoming an addict themselves. Then there's trauma bonding. It's a lot, man.
It is. And you brought up, just the anger that exists on the non-addicted partner. And, really, it creates this disconnect,
Oh yeah.
even when they want to help. I mean, so what can they do to, I guess if they want to help, they're angry, it creates a disconnect, but kind of reconnect.
They have to go get help. They need Al-Anon. Al-Anon is an organization that is like Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's for the families of the alcoholic. If they can get some kind of counseling, that would be good. And that is counseling for themselves, not the couple. Because now they're put in a position where they have to deal with what happened to them, you know, because the addict's behavior is disturbing what they believe is peace. And to get to that point, they have to understand, well, has what I've been feeling peace, or has it just been me maneuvering through my own trauma? So people don't know if they've been living in a life of peace or a life of turmoil. But when something like this happens, it forces everyone to look deeply into who they are. So they need
Mhm.
to go to Al-Anon, they need to get some help.
And it's hard for the non-addicted spouse to say, I also need to go seek out help. Um, and you talked a little bit about the roles and the family dynamics, hey, let's just do this at home, don't go out in public, or the child having to take over the parenting relationship. How else do the family dynamic and relationship roles just accidentally reinforce the addiction?
Well, you have a man who's the head of the house making the decisions, and everyone trusts the decisions that they make. Well, when addiction hits and they get to the point where they can't function consistently, then the wife starts to step in because she wants to save face. And she's thinking, hey, I'm doing my wifely duties by supporting my husband. But it's not helping. It's not helping the husband suffer any consequences for his behavior. So it's going to make it worse. It's going to really beat down on her psychologically and emotionally. It will be difficult for her to regulate her emotions from one day to the next, which bleeds over into how they parent. Because now the parents, they're both feeling guilty and they're both just giving the child whatever they ask for just to make sure they feel okay, which means the child is not going to feel discipline, and discipline is a synonym for love. So now they may start acting out at school or in some other way. So it's just like a snowball effect. One addict in a family, especially a household that has a married couple with children, is just it's like an atomic bomb. And sometimes if they can work it out, great. But if they can defuse that atomic bomb before it explodes, great. But after it explodes, you know how nuclear bomb will affect everybody. It's a wrap. There's nothing else you can do except leave. You have to leave, or it's going to get worse.
And you talk about the difference between diffusing it and the explosion. So, in my mind, that kind of brings up, you're supporting the person versus enabling them. So, what is the psychological difference to somebody supporting you versus somebody enabling you?
Well, if somebody supports you, and we talked about it earlier, they can call you out and tell you when you're not being reasonable. When you're headed toward making a mistake, and they can do it in a tactful way where it's productive. When people are enabling, they're skirting over the behavior and just putting a band-aid on it, okay, and just letting them do it for a little while longer. Or they're saying, hey, I think you really need to consider going to get some help, maybe. I'm not saying, they're not really telling the truth. So when they're enabling, they're wanting the other person, the addict, to feel okay, you know, and they want themselves to not have to worry about confrontation.
Yeah. And, in family divorces, child custody issues, we see that a lot where one person and it has tried to help by doing nothing more than enabling. And then now it's time to set boundaries, especially when children are involved. And I remember I had a case where the mom took the daughter up to the mountains, and the police finally found the daughter in a rundown hotel with mom passed out on the floor with a needle still in her arm. And when the police did the preliminary search of the daughter, they found mom had been hiding all of her needles and the drugs in the daughter's purse. And so we had to go to court. We had to get the mom. The mom needed to stay away from the daughter for a little bit, but she did not feel like that she was being helped. So,
Yeah.
how can you set the healthy boundaries between a family, not the court, without guilt when you're the one having to set the boundaries? Because I know my client felt guilty as all get out, having to take the daughter away from the mom because the daughter loved her mom, and he felt terrible about having to do that. So, how can you help people through that guilt?
It's not easy, but you do have to set firm and consistent boundaries. Because if you don't, then the person who is in active addiction will not feel or experience any consequences. Consequences are the only thing that will change behavior. That's it. So if to reframe the mindset so a person doesn't feel so guilty and so shameful about having to do this with their loved one, the understanding should be, no, I love them enough that I can let them feel what they're doing so that they can change their behavior. Because if you don't set the boundaries, they have no reason to change. If we keep enabling them, they have there are no consequences. There's no reason to change. Everything is as normal. Hey, we're steady as she goes. And the end of this is jail, an institution, or death. There's no in between. That's what addiction is. progressively degenerative disease. It does not get better. Untreated, it does not get better.
Yeah, I remember the argument the other side used in that case. It was relatively persuasive that if they take the daughter away completely, mom would have no reason not to just do the drugs all the time. And I remember the judge looked, he kind of did what he stepped back a little bit and thought about it. And it almost worked. And I had to give the other attorney, I was like, that was close. I said, you almost got me on that one. I said, fortunately, the judge is like, but she was with her when she did this. And, you know, what we experienced in that was the parents were the drivers. So the parents were showing up to court saying, this isn't a big deal. Our daughter's fine. This isn't a big deal. We'll step in when our daughter can't to help. And they brought up a lot of psychological layers beneath the addiction, right? She has anxiety, she has depression, trauma. How it's true they were using it to fight, but how often do anxiety, depression, trauma, self-esteem issues coexist with addiction?
40 to 60% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety, depression, 30 to 50% of the time. Just trauma overall, 50% of the time. But overall, if you lump it all in one bucket, coexisting conditions represent 60 to 70% in all addicts. So when I said at the beginning of the interview, we look for reasons, because the reasons are the answer to how to get the addict to stop using or to stop being in active addiction. Got to find the reason. Having been an addict in recovery since 1995, I have not met a person who did not have a coexisting condition. I believe it all is all dual diagnosis. And if you don't treat the psychological and emotional disorder, then you will never treat the addiction, because they're going to keep going back to the addiction because it was the solution.
And that's what we see, and especially in divorce, when emotions are running the highest, I mean, you're going to see something like that. But what other emotional triggers do you see that tend to fuel the I don't want to say relapse, but just the continuation of the addictive behavior?
Yeah, you can say relapse, you can say lapse, you can say back in complete active addiction, but psychological triggers would be, a memory of someone that you lost during the addiction, or the feeling that you get when you walk in a room and people just look at you like, are you high? Are you drunk? Even if you're not, that's a trigger. When in early recovery, the triggers come psychologically in three ways. First, they will come through your dreams. You will have a using dream, is what we call them, where you dream about using your drug of choice or doing, if you're sexual addiction, you have that dream, gambling. So the addiction is trying to get you through your dreams while you're sleeping. When you're awake, your significant other, your partner, your wife, your husband, your spouse, the addict will always gravitate towards something that they did or something that they said or you said in the past, and it'll be a trigger for them to go use, and they can say, well, forget it. What's the use? You know? And the third way is through your family. Oh my goodness. When you go to the cookout and then Uncle Buck sees you, hey, how you doing, man? Come on in. What you having? you know? And in your mind, it's like, well, the normal familiar thing to say is, I want the Remy on the rocks, please. You know, so we have to use our coping skills to overcome these times and these triggers. Emotional triggers, psychological triggers are directly connected to any and everything physical. So if there's a trigger, it's going to eventually and overall just be psychological.
And what we see a lot is, especially in divorces and child custody cases, the ex-spouse will know those psychological triggers and push hard to go for a relapse to help their case out. What are the warning signs that you can kind of see from the outside of a relapse coming?
Well, what I try to teach people is you really can't put a whole lot of stock into a person's personality at that point. You pay attention to their pattern. And when a person's in recovery, their patterns change. You know, who they associate with, where they go after work or during work. Well, what do they look at? You know, what do they read? How are they walking? How are they if pattern starts to change and there's something that's atypical, that's a sign that a relapse is coming. Because if something's different, that means something changed. If something changed, that means something's different. So in early recovery, you really have to pay attention to the patterns changing. It can be subtle. Say, for instance, one of mine was I would walk from one room to the other. And if I started to cut the corner too closely and just bump my shoulder, if I did that enough times, I would say, "Oh, wait a minute. Why am I defocusing? What is going on?" And I have to call my support network. You know, I have to call my life coach and my therapist and say, "Hey, look, this is happening, blah, 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 blah." You know, and if I can't get them, I'm call the family member, friend, I'm gonna call my sponsor because I need to get to the bottom of this because it will derail my whole life.
And I like how you talked about those patterns, right? You started noticing when you were cutting the corner that it was almost like a dysregulation, like you weren't regulating your mind enough. What other mental habits and coping strategies help reduce the relapse?
Well, I have a whole list of coping strategies. Um, there's CBT, cognitive behavioral, and dialectical. Um, it's as simple as if you come into an environment and you're triggered by someone, and it's a social event, it's good to just get away from it for a second. So I'll always say, "Excuse me, where's the bathroom?" I'll go to the bathroom, look at myself in the mirror, and say, "Okay, okay, do you want to go back in there, or do you want to just leave and get in your car and go home?" You know, but you have to interrupt the thought. And that's the whole purpose of coping skills. Interrupt the thought and give yourself time to regroup. Some people will look at an object, maybe it's a bookcase or something, and they feel a trigger, but they'll look at the bookcase and start identifying what's on the bookcase. Well, it's a brown bookcase about 3 feet tall. It's got three shelves. There's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven books on it, and they'll describe it long enough for the trigger and the urge to pass. You know, there are breathing exercises you can do. You breathe in for 3 seconds, hold it for 3 seconds, and breathe out for 3 seconds. You do that about 5 times, and you'll interrupt the thought. So it's things like that. In my early recovery, I mean, I was shameless. If I got triggered and someone was talking to me, I would literally drop down and start doing push-ups. And I didn't care what they thought about it because I'm thinking, look, you didn't end up under that bridge. I did. And I'm not going back. So if I have to do push-ups because you triggered me, then so be it. You can stay or walk away. That's fine with me. You know, my life is different now, you know. But if in a marriage, if that it's not the case, if a person has not hit that rock bottom where the consequences outweigh the benefits of using the addiction, it's going to be a hurricane of a relationship.
Yeah, and you talk about taking those steps that are healthy and moving on. I love the idea of the push-ups. I wish I could just do that in normal conversation. Every time somebody starts talking, I just do push-ups till they're done talking. Every time I want to interrupt somebody, I'll start doing push-ups. Um, we unfortunately running out of time. I could tell you this for another 30 minutes.
Oh yeah.
But we have listeners that I know are struggling with this because they're going through some of the worst time of their life. What's the best piece of advice you could give our listeners so that they can take something away, and even after the divorce, after everything seems to have fallen apart, they can get themselves better to move forward?
You have to have a strong support network. That's one. Two, you have to realize this is not your fault. So give yourself some grace and forgive yourself. And lastly, you have to understand that what you're looking for in your life is the reasons that you behave the way you do and the reason you respond to your environment in the manner that you do. It's not obvious. And it takes some counseling. It takes some conversation. So find the reasons. forgive yourself, and have a strong support network.
I think that could be in so many things. So, Mayshawn, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I mean, a lot of the things that you said, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm not addiction, but sometimes I eat things that I don't want to do. You know, noticing the patterns that I shouldn't do, right? Especially coming up on the new year when we think about changing some of our bad habits. A
Right.
lot of what you said, although a bad habit is nowhere close to an addiction, could be applied in a lot of areas before you get too mad and yell at somebody. You know, I could only imagine if you're in the middle of an argument and say, before I raise my voice, I'm going to do push-ups. Um, you'd probably be in a much better position, and you'd look better when you popped your shirt off.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you like this episode, please hit like or subscribe, and we look forward to be able to talk to you all next time and share amazing tips like Mayshawn shared with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.